Biden administration is risking nothing less than a third world war in Ukraine on European soil, where I am. And we are in a situation that is far more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. And when I now hear that NATO is counting on Russia not making good on its threat of a counterstrike, and that Russian President Putin said to be merely bluffing, that is precisely the mentality of those sleepwalking into a major war. Well, because what will happen if next time British arms factories are struck by Russian missiles? Will they then risk a nuclear war that would mean the end of Europe? Especially remarkable here is the denial of reality among NATO politicians and military leaders in Europe. We can see war approaching in slow motion, as when, for example, the genius German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock proclaims that the aim of the war is to ruin Russia, or the British generals declare that the British army is ready to take on Russia. So historically, this is all too reminiscent of the Wilhelmine overconfidence and the grotesque underestimation of its opponents, in this regard Russia, which paved the way for the First World War here in Europe. So now to Trump. I think we are witnessing a declining hegemon, like Claudia said, that currently seems to be betting an absolute escalation in the proxy war in Ukraine in order to stave off what it perceives as impending defeat. And if we look at how the defeated US President Joe Biden has drastically increased the risk of world war by authorizing US long-range weapons for President Zelensky's attacks on Russia, on Russian territorium, one must hope that Donald Trump keeps his promise to quickly end the Ukraine war and thus avert this all-out escalation towards which Washington is heeding at the moment. So Biden and NATO are now conjuring up a crisis that goes far beyond the dangers of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And if Russia follows through on its threat to retaliate with intermediate range missiles, we will then be in a major war in Europe. But Trump also poses dangerous uncertainties. Trump's team is, like Claudia said, diverse. It includes neoconservatives, such as Secretary of State designate Marco Rubio, for example, like Claudia mentioned, and who in the 2016 election was still calling Trump a third world dictator and criticizing him for his proposed Russia policy. So the scenario in the central positions is more likely to be Trump could be the man who helps to end or at least freeze wars like the one in Ukraine, but only to pursue an all the more aggressive strategy of US confrontation and containment vis-à-vis China, Latin America, and the Middle East. Russia, meanwhile, would be left to the European NATO allies to take care of in order to free up the resources for the US on the three fronts described, like China, Latin America, and Middle East, and with China as the main enemy of the US. And there is much to suggest that Biden only wants to postpone NATO's catastrophic defeat in Ukraine until Trump is president and in office. Hence, this unprecedented escalation in the interim period. I mean, I have never seen such a thing like Biden did now. So Trump could seek to avoid open NATO-Russia war and to contain the war in Ukraine along the existing front lines. And as I said, the goal would be to divert US resources against China. And they already started. I mean, Germany is the second biggest arms supplier for Ukraine after the US, and second biggest financial supplier after the US. So Ukraine's NATO membership would be suspended for a decade or two, but it should be remembered that it was Trump who pushed for the arms buildup in Kiev in 2017 and who pursued a strategy of leading Ukraine along as an informal member of the NATO. So regarding the Middle East, the Trump administration will be 150% on the side of the Netanyahu government, parts of which are far right, extreme far right. And even though the Israeli prime minister is now subject to an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court, our German government just declared that they are still thinking how to deal with the arrest warrant. Me, myself, I am very ready to arrest him when he is on German soil. However, it cannot be ruled out that the war in Gaza and Lebanon will be waged even more aggressively by the US as a proxy war in which Trump could nevertheless seek to emphasize the benefits for the US and push for a temporary ceasefire. And as far as Latin America is concerned, the most aggressive US policy since 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion is to be anticipated. The Trump administration will attempt to stage a complete rollback in Latin America in line with the Monroe Doctrine, with the aim of regime change in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, but also in Brazil, and Bolivia is also in the crosshairs. So, however, it is to be expected that the ultimate escalation is being prepared with regard to China. And a US economic war against China has already been set in motion with both moral and economic arguments put forward. The European Union is already acting as Washington's aid agency. The leader of the European Commission, von der Leyen, is a talking doll of the US. And in any case, it's not taking any independent action. So don't rely on the Europeans. And German industry will be sunk in this situation for sure. Germany and Europe are now threatened with deindustrialization. And as a result, the erosion of what remains of the welfare state. China will remain the main adversary of the US administration. Trump will launch a trade war right from the start, he said. He already announced it. He's already announced that he's planning 40% of increase in import tariffs regarding China, 20% import tariffs to the Europeans, especially to the Germans. This will have serious consequences for the global economy. So we will, at that point, be looking at the end of globalization. So the negative consequences of the German economy and the welfare state here are incalculable. And the same applies to Europe as a whole. So not a good perspective at all. At the end, the only good perspective is, or the only hope is, that that actually Trump with his slogan "Make America Great Again" or America First, it is likely that he's going to be the president who is going to do the global South great, and he's facing the decline of the US, and he is going to be the president of the decline of the West.